Right, good morning everyone. We're going to get going. Thank you very much indeed for your patience. Aviation in a world of evolving supply chains is this session. I also want to say a special welcome to all of you, I don't know how many of you, who were at the DHL tour late last night, I think. Me, for example. Oh, there you go. The State Secretary was at the DHL tour last night, and I think a lot of people got back at about 1:32 a.m., so I take my hat off to you, and I hope you've had plenty of coffee this morning. My name is Axel Threlfall. I'm editor-at-large at Reuters, based out of London. I'm going to introduce our excellent panel in just a moment, but let me just set out a few words of context. Might surprise you to know that this is the first time the ITF has dedicated a panel at this forum to air cargo. Its absence thus far from the agenda might, you may think, be down to the extent to which air freight has suffered in recent years from the resurgence of an increasingly reliable, more environmentally friendly and lower-cost maritime sector. On the other hand, the fact that I'm sitting here today moderating a panel on air cargo should send a very clear message that this is a sector whose role in international trade is far too often overlooked, and so we're addressing that this morning. We'll hear in a moment that the air cargo recovery is well underway and continuing at a very healthy pace. And just very quickly to throw a few other statistics at you, while air freight accounts for just 1% of reported world trade tonnage carried, aviation focuses on the speedy delivery of high-value and time-sensitive products. So from a value perspective, that modest volume represents 35% of global trade, and I think that is a very important number. And from a strategic perspective, air cargo is the backbone in the global value chain of a number of key industry sectors such as pharmaceuticals, perishables, electronics, aerospace, among other high-value goods. So, plenty of other issues to talk about. What are the short and long-term prospects for air cargo? How will passenger carriers, freighters operators and air express carriers adapt to the changing landscape? What are the potential gains for air cargo from further liberalization? And how can governments help facilitate the global air cargo supply chain, particularly within the context of heightened security measures? Let me introduce our panel. They'll each get a couple of minutes to lay out their stand, if you like. I'll then kick off a Q&A session, and I do encourage you to get involved in that as well. Next to me, German Vice Minister Dorothy Baer, Parliamentary State Secretary at the Federal Ministry of Transport and Digital Infrastructure. Welcome, State Secretary. James Billing is Managing Director, Market Analysis at Boeing Commercial Airplanes. Vladimir Zubkov is Vice President, Relations with International Organizations at Russian air freight carrier Volga-Dnepr. Glenn Hughes is Global Head of Cargo at the International Air Transport Association. And on the end, Al Bedran is Transportation District Manager for the Europe region at UPS. So, as I said, an extremely well-versed panel. Get your own questions ready for them after we've had some opening statements. I'd first like to give the floor to the State Secretary. Yeah, you stay right where you are if you like.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was not very late yesterday. It was very early this morning. So, but I think that's okay, and it's a good thing if we talk about our topic today that we did it that night. So someone told me we have interpreters, so I'm going to switch to German. So everyone is ready. Yeah, good morning.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to see all of you here back again in Leipzig, and also on behalf of our ministry, I would like to say there's one receiver missing, and on behalf of our ministry, I would like to say how happy we are to be hosting this event in Germany. So welcome again to you all. We are all very pleased to be speaking about this topic because it's of an essential importance. You mentioned that we visited DHL last night, and when I see colleagues from UPS, there are also many companies that use Germany a lot as a hub, be it Leipzig or be it Cologne, Bonn. So it's a decisive topic. Germany is positioned in a very central location in Europe. We are a hub for international air freight. And when you look at that from Germany, you can reach all regions worldwide very well. So it's important to talk about aviation, and not only about passenger transport, but also strongly about air cargo. There are, of course, also high-value goods that are being transported via air cargo. We see the mechanical engineering goods being transported, high technology, where there are strong producers. What's also very important is medical products, and for medical products it is essential to have well-functioning procedures and operations. When you look at air cargo and what it means for Germany, I would like to state a few numbers. In a foreign trade overseas, i.e. Africa, America, Australia, Asia, we have a value share of air cargo based on our overall exports of 30%, and based on the volume of goods, air cargo accounts for only 2%. If we look at the value of air cargo, that's a very interesting figure, I think. If you look at the values that are being transported, we see that a ton of air cargo costs approximately 70,000 euros over the goods value of a ton that's transported by sea or by land. It's between 1,200 and 3,000 euros. So it's a multiple volume of goods that are transported by air. So air cargo is of central importance for our economy. It ensures employment. If you look at Leipzig or also the Cologne-Bonn area, you see that for the region of Leipzig, it has attracted a lot of business since we have the air cargo hub here, and UPS has phrased the quote that the only alternative to Cologne is Cologne. So we closely look at the locations that are selected, particularly also in the German area. So it's not only employment, we also have value creation through air cargo, and you also see how the situation changes in the European aviation markets. DHL has moved to Leipzig because the conditions in Brussels were increasingly difficult, so you see that they are closely watching the marginal conditions that are provided by the host countries. In particular, in Germany, German and European airlines are in a very fierce competition among one another, but also with extra-European competitors who are pressing on the market. If you look on the Middle East and Asia, you see that they have to fight their position and that they're facing a strong competition from these markets. Because the home countries of the regions I've mentioned see the strategic future in aviation for their countries. If you look at the airports, how they are developing worldwide, how some countries that we haven't focused on so far and that we weren't aware of so far, how they are developing major airports, and you see countries with less strict restrictions, more open regions that have the ambition to build the largest airports in the world. So in Europe, we are not leading the market anymore. 50% of air cargo are done through belly hold transport. That puts strain on aviation, and as countries we have the task to create the marginal conditions for air cargo happening in our countries and maintaining our companies competitive on the international market. We are discussing this strongly in the European Union, but also with ICAO, and on a national level we are working on a new aviation concept for strengthening and ensuring the aviation location in Germany, and to consider aviation appropriately. Operating times are a central issue, and therefore we are welcoming the aviation package that has been approved by the European Commission, which poses improvements for the competitiveness of the European Union, and prioritization of aviation by the Juncker Commission. As a federal government, we will support this commission, and I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I'm very pleased to see that this is a very high-ranking international panel, and I'm grateful for any ideas or wishes that are expressed today. I can't promise that we will fulfill them all, but I will definitely listen and take them along to my ministry.
State Secretary. I will come back in a moment once we've heard from the other panelists, and I have some questions for you relating in particular to liberalization. But the State Secretary has just laid down a challenge then, so you can throw your ideas and your wishes at the State Secretary, either during this panel or after. Right, let's get a step back global picture. I want to hand over to James Billing from Boeing.
Thanks, everybody, for coming in. I know it's early, especially for those of you who did go out and see the big sorting facility out there at the airport last night. I've done that myself. I didn't do it last night because I knew I probably wouldn't make it in today. But it's a really interesting process, and I think our colleague from UPS maybe can talk a little bit about that. I want to, oops, I should grab the...
This one is not universal.
That'll change the volume.
Let's see. Okay, so somebody help get the presentation up. The Boeing. Because I did bring some slides today. There we go. Just a few charts. So indeed, air cargo is a very dynamic market, and we've been through some rough years, but things are looking better now, and so I'm going to take you through that very quickly. First off, just to reiterate, air cargo isn't about competing for all the volume out there. It's providing very fast, reliable, fairly secure service for goods that need that kind of treatment, and it's about 1%, as we said, by weight, but 35% by value. I saw a statistic in The Economist magazine a month or two ago that said the goods landed at Heathrow, and Heathrow is not one of the world's leading cargo airports, exceed the value of all the goods landed at London's massive container ports. So just something to think about. All types of goods transport, ocean shipping and air, went through some really tough times after the Great Recession. After a large drop, volumes recovered but then stagnated, and finally, about a year and a half ago, we started to come out of the stagnation, and since late 2013, we've been growing at what we think are trend growth rates again, and it's a sign that the world's economy is coming back on stream. And while ocean shipping may be a competitor, we think the main reason that air cargo growth stagnated was the massive recession and the big downturn in manufacturing output in many of the sectors that air cargo is well tuned to carry, as well as the difficulties with consumers in the big markets of the EU and the US. So as those economies recover, we don't see any reason why air cargo won't continue to grow at about 4 to 5%, roughly in line with the rate of international trade growth, which leading economists see as growing at about 5% per year. Just like passenger traffic, air cargo growth rates vary widely around the world. Strongest growth are between the Asian markets and Europe and North America, and those are also very large markets and very important markets for air cargo in both bellies of passenger airplanes and maybe even more so in freighters. But you can see the diversification of trade with other emerging markets as well. So as we think about the infrastructure that's going to be needed and the kind of regulatory improvements and maybe speeding up processes like customs, be thinking about this as a global issue, not just confined to the traditional markets between, say, Europe and the United States, and Asia and Europe, or Asia and the United States. Now, we talked a lot about Apple products going by air, and indeed, they are a very important user of air cargo, as are many of the other technology companies. In fact, I saw a picture just recently of a 777 freighter loaded with nearly 100 tons of iPhones, almost 200,000 iPhones worth probably $150 million on the market, one airplane. But the fact is, air cargo is important to many, many industries. And again, it's that need for speed because the goods are perishable, extremely valuable, very sensitive, needing careful treatment. and air is very well suited to providing that. You can make the trip in 1 day from Asia to Europe, whereas a container ship might take 3 weeks. So again, we're heavily interwoven into the fabric of the world economy, but we're not the volume leaders. We're just a very important component of the economy. Without us, things start to break down, and it isn't just finished products, it's intermediate goods. Like there's a vast flow of automobile parts across the Atlantic between Europe and the United States, just as another example. And without those parts, the factories can't run smoothly. The cars don't get finished on time. Airlines address the air cargo market in a number of ways, but freighters play a dominant role still. And you can see that the airlines that only have belly capacity represent just about 10% of the total revenue in the air cargo business, whereas the combination carriers that have a mix of freighters and passenger airplanes in their fleet have the largest share at a little over 40% of revenues. And then, of course, the express carriers like DHL, FedEx, and UPS are the next largest at 38%. And then the specialists, the all freighter type airlines, are the other 11%. And they're all viable business models. And again, our job at Boeing and the other manufacturers like us is to give them the tools they need to be successful in the future, including increasingly efficient airplanes that burn less fuel, generate less CO2, and are much quieter at airports. So here's a chart that just shows you the importance of freighters in some of the key markets. Between Europe and Asia, 75% of the freight is going by freighters, the rest in belly holds. 80% on the Trans-Pacific, and a little under half in the transatlantic. So freighters aren't going away, and I'd encourage airports in particular, as they think about upgrading their facilities, to factor in the freighters, the need for belly hold, loading at the gates where the passenger airplanes are parked, and intermodalism, because freight doesn't deliver itself. Unlike passengers, doesn't get off the airplane and walk to its car and disappear. Needs to be connected to trucks or rail or some other mode to get to the final destination. And finally, if you want more information, our material's posted online. We have a World Air Cargo Forecast that was released last fall. And I'll stick around after the session if any of you have questions. And of course, we have the Q&A coming up. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, James. You know, I have one quick question for you, actually, just on the back of that. Those two big numbers that you put up at the top, and I mentioned them in my intro, the 1% tonnage and the 35% value of cargo. How quickly can we expect to see those numbers move up?
You know, I think the addressable market for air cargo, and I know Glenn will talk about this, is larger than the current share it holds, and some of it's on our backs as the industry to improve our services, and then some of it's working with governments and airports to improve the infrastructure, regulations, and other sorts of things that may impede air cargo's ability to deliver, you know, its full promise of speed and efficiency and reliability. But I think we heard yesterday in the OECD forecast that the actual outlook for development of products and industries kind of favors air cargo, because China's going to move up the value chain, and they're going to be producing and consuming more things that lend themselves to air cargo transport.
Okay, very good. James, many thanks for that, and no doubt we'll talk a little bit more about that. Now, Volga Neper, of course, represents all the players in the supply chain. Vladimir Zubkov, the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator. Good morning, everybody, and indeed, thank you for turning up here. I would like to talk to you about two subject areas, and my presentation is under the name Zubkov, if you are looking for it. First, it will be about TIACA, the International Air Cargo Association. I'm talking about it as a member of the board, and I would like to start by referring to what James just mentioned. The cargo doesn't walk out of the airplane, and it doesn't walk into the airplane. So it needs a combination of services which are represented in the organization called TIACA. So we start with the shippers, origin forwarders, export carriers, import customs, destination forwarders, consignees. So all these are represented in this organization. And what we are after in our membership is to promote networking, knowledge, and we provide advocacy in front of the international bodies and national administrations like the German administration or the European communities or United States Department of Transport. The key challenges and priorities which we consider are the objective of our organization are security, automation, environment, market access, competition, and development of the human capital, the people. The TIACA operates through contacts with the members and also through annual and biennial events. And one of the important events just has taken place in TIACA. It was the Executive Summit 1 week ago. And we actually managed to attract for our meeting quite a big number of people, 200 plus. And we covered all the issues which I just mentioned as our priorities. The summit, which we consider quite successful, leads to the next event, which is going to be in Paris in about a year and a half from now. And this is our sort of flagship, where we consider all the important issues and lead to the decisions. The major theme of this summit will be innovations. And judging by the numbers of participants in the room next door, which is talking about the innovations, we are right on the money. So what we have not decided yet, what kind of innovations we will put on the agenda. And this is where I'm appealing to all of you and to the Vice Minister too, because the issue of innovations can be considered in terms of regulatory innovations, the technological innovations, the security innovations, and we want to bring into this summit everything which will allow the air cargo industry to move forward, supported by the innovations. This is the picture of the board of directors, and why I'm bringing it on the screen, not only because I like seeing my own picture there, but also because I want you to feel comfortable that every bit of industry is represented. The Boeing company is represented, Jim Edgar, you know him obviously, James. The UPS, the FedEx company, all the supply chain members, like the people who work on the ground, airlines, airports, everybody is there. And that's, once again, I must give you assurance that we are covering the whole supply chain. And as one unit of the supply chain, the Volga-Dnepr Group, I would like to make you familiar with the major aspects of my airline, or my group. I don't want you to feel almost threatened by the number of pictures which are on the same slide. I just want to show to you the complexity of our group. We are the most developed airline in Russia, and we are in the 12th place in the world. We have amassed a lot of awards. And the awards represent the trust and appreciation by the customers. We have two branches in our group. It's cargo, scheduled airline, Airbridge Cargo, which is well known in Leipzig as well, and also Volga-Dnepr Charter company. Again, it does a lot of business in Leipzig, and we are developing here. This is our network. If we don't fly somewhere with scheduled services, we cover it with the charter services. And as you can see, the network is well developed. These are the pictures which just illustrate to you what kind of cargo can come into the planes like the Antonov 124, the huge pieces of cargo. And in the middle, there are companies, logos of the companies which cooperate with us. And our fleet, I'm talking about now the charter branch, 10 Antonov 124, the biggest cargo planes in the world, 5 Ilyushin 76, and in the air bridge cargo, which is scheduled, we rely on Boeing cargo airplanes. At the moment we have 14, and we are about to increase our fleet to double it, maybe even to triple it, because we feel that the air cargo is a real contributor to the development of the global economies, and we can have our own share there. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Vladimir. And I'm glad you mentioned innovations as your theme, because I'd like to talk, once we're done with the presentations, about innovation specifically related to safety and indeed innovation related to the environment. So thank you for that. Glenn Hughes, let's get the airline perspective.
Great, thank you very much, and allow me to add my warm welcome to everybody in the audience and to congratulate the OECD and the organizers of the ITF for putting on a dedicated air cargo panel. I think it's been much voiced in terms of the value that air cargo brings to the global economy, and I think it's great to be able to expose and talk about some of the challenges and the issues that we see going forward. I'm going to talk about a few things this morning: supply chain evolution, some of the things we're monitoring very closely in terms of consumer behavioral changes and the impact that will have on the industry, and some of the other challenges that we actually see going forward. And I'd like to conclude with some comments, particularly in relation to the Vice Secretary or the Secretary's earlier comments with regards to challenges to government, where we can work more closely together. As already has been mentioned, air cargo is very much about high-value goods, about transporting things just in time, time-sensitive, very critical. And we see significant evolution in those type of commodities, which therefore require the industry itself to evolve accordingly. As the greater propensity to carry things which are what we would call sensitive, whether or not they are subject to increased time and temperature awareness and monitoring, or certainly just in time, such as we have here, things of the airbag recall, which recently was a significant transportation commodity which was utilized heavily through air cargo because of a certain issue in the west coast of the US, as well as perishable activity. So the air cargo industry over the last few years has certainly had to focus on how we address these in a higher quality environment. One of the other aspects, which is actually something which is really going to change the way things going forward, is us as individuals, as consumers. My children, for example, are a very strong bellwether of this, and they will spend an increasingly amount of time shopping online. And when we look at some of the numbers and the smartphone technology, we see that this is going to be a growing trend. And I apologize if you can't read some of these numbers, but this is just an example of e-commerce spending on some of the key shopping holidays with regards to Black Friday or Cyber Monday in the US. And more importantly, the blue bar here is Singles Day in China, November the 11th. And if you look at the incredible explosion here, and last year saw a number of about $9 billion in one day, and Jack Ma, as the president of Alibaba, was being interviewed, and he looked disconsolate. His face was very glum, and they said, surely you should be overwhelmed with these numbers. And he just had one comment, and he said, this is domestic. He said, when we go global, the logistics industry, the aviation industry is not ready for this type of explosive activity in the e-commerce sector, which is certainly a strong warning that what we need to do and change as an industry. And again, when we see e-commerce and business-to-consumer sales around the world, we see that certain parts of the world are quite well developed. There's significant growth and continue to grow year over year, but it's not happening everywhere. Africa, which we're much watching because it's a continent of 1 billion, there's a huge potential growth for e-commerce sales there, but there is a huge restriction, or shall we say, current challenges with ground infrastructure. So there are a number of issues that we have to address if we're really going to be able to leverage the evolution of the consumer. With regards to the evolution of the industry, It's sad to say that we're transporting the most high-tech digital goods, scientific equipment, medical equipment, but sadly we're using some very poor processes to do it. The industry is still heavily reliant on paper. Up to 30 pieces of paper can be required to accompany a single shipment. And this is certainly where we would call upon all parties. And as Vladimir mentioned, the supply chain is very complex for air cargo. It does involve a lot of entities. A lot of those entities have to invest, a lot of them do, but everybody needs to make the investments and work closely with governments to enable us to remove the paper. There is an industry project out there designed to remove the paper, and at the end of last year, only 1 in 4 shipments actually transported without the paper airway bill, which is the cargo equivalent of the passenger ticket. So 3 out of 4 shipments still required a piece of paper to say what the shipment is, where it's going, how it should be handled. And of course, if you're using a piece of paper to tell critical activities in terms of handling and information to the various entities utilizing it in the supply chain, that information is traveling at the speed of the freight. We need to have that information travel ahead of the freight so it can get to the situation where those who are waiting for the freight can be aware of what's coming, what it needs to be done to transport it safely and securely. Much discussion has been said about the new next generation of fantastic wide-bodied aircraft, whether or not it's the, in fact, the 777-200 today is talked about as like a mini freighter. The A350, soon to be coming on stream again. It's got tremendous cargo-friendly holds, as is the 787. But certainly from an IATA perspective, we see going forward very much a harmonization of the 2 different types of freight transportation, whether or not it's main deck or belly, because there are certain commodities which cannot be transported in sufficient quantities in the belly of an aircraft. Formula One, for example, requires a fleet of freighters to move the cars around to make sure that, you know, on a Sunday afternoon we can watch the race and the cars are there, rather than watching cardboard cutouts because the cars were held up in customs, or worse still, I hate to say this, on a ship. And, you know, you really couldn't have 20 races in a year where you had 21 days between the races because they went on ocean. So air cargo is very much there. Vladimir, you'll like the picture we have in the bottom right. And I think this is just going to illustrate that certain commodities certainly do need the capacity that main deck can offer. I know my children, when it came to Christmas, certainly wanted the latest technology. And if I said, well, actually, it's going to take 17 weeks to transport it in the bellies available, that would not have been good. Likewise, when it came to anniversaries, my wife is very much looking for flowers, although I always have to say this with an apology, the day after the anniversary, because I always forget. And those flowers are very much reliant on, you know, a lot of freighter capacity coming from East Africa through to particularly Schiphol in Europe. So we very much see capacity balance going forward. The market will determine what it needs for the commodities that they're asking air cargo to transport. Lastly, I'd like to conclude with, again, going back to some of the early requests for how can we work more closely with governments. We would very much like to request that governments support information digitalization. And this is very much linked to harmonization. It's very difficult in a complex supply chain if you have governments very supportive at origin to say, yes, we do not need the paper to actually transport the goods. But sadly, when it arrives at destination, the governments there and the regulatory authorities don't have the same view, and they demand to see a piece of paper with an original signature. Likewise, when it comes to security programs, cost of security is growing ever more complex. And I think this is one of the challenges we have as an industry. We have to innovate to transport the goods that the shippers want us to transport in a safe, secure environment. And yet today, far too much of the airlines and the freight forwarders and the ground handlers and the trucking companies' dollars are being invested into security compliance programs. So we need mutual recognition. We need certainly government and industry mutual discussions to try and come up with fit-for-purpose solutions. Regarding infrastructure, I think Jim earlier on spoke very eloquently about the need to have good airport infrastructure and the need for intermodality. No cargo is actually manufactured in an airport or consumed at an airport, so an airport and to an airport segment is only one component of a very complex supply chain. And we need to make sure that there are, as it were, environmentally friendly interfaces, efficient interfaces. The freight forwarding community with whom the airlines work very, very closely together need to have a number of options available at their behest, as it were, to supply the solutions that their customers ultimately require. With regard to capacity flexibility, I know you're going to talk about liberalization. The key that we need to look at here is being able to put the capacity where it's needed. And again, talking about the next generation of wide-bodied passenger aircraft, but of course, those are only put on routes where there is a significant amount of passenger traffic. What we often find is that where manufacturing centers create and evolve, initially, there is no passenger demand there. So you need the freighters to actually create or supply that initial demand for capacity. Furthermore, trade facilitation, cost of compliance, complexity at border crossings is something that trade facilitation agreements can certainly seek to smooth out. Bali is an agreement in particular that we as IATA would advocate states ratify so we can get that implemented, even initially as a best practice before the required number of states ratify it globally. And protectionist measures. And I think this is an area where increasingly amount of concern has been raised in the last 4 years by our chief economist with regards to the number of measures being introduced by G20 nations, for example. There's been over 900 separate measures, which make it very difficult for the manufacturing industry to operate, and therefore what's difficult for the manufacturers is difficult for us as airlines to fly those goods out of the market. And these compose of not just trade quotas and tariff barriers, for example, but there are as a greater number of what we would call murky non-tariff measures. For example, where packaging needs to be in local language, there needs to be a percentage of national domestic featuring in the production side of things, or even in one example where the colors of tomatoes were regulated to reach a certain measurement on the color red scale, which is tended to favor national production and growth because of the soil fertilization and the nitrates. Makes it very difficult then for overseas tomato growers. So we would certainly advocate significant amount of dialogue with trade and governments there. And I think with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Glenn. Right, let's finish up with Al Badran from UPS, and then we'll open it up to Q&A.
Thank you, Axel.
Yeah, go ahead. Just talk straight into it.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Axel. Well, first, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the ITF for its continued efforts in the advancement to economic progress in world trade. And on behalf of Cindy Miller, our Europe UPS president, again, thank the ITF for this platform. Air cargo offers many growth potentials for small, medium businesses as well as large corporations. It is an essential mode for transport within our global supply chains. I think it's been mentioned here several times, air cargo transports roughly 35% of our global trade today. What hasn't been mentioned is that it has a financial value of just south of $7 trillion on an annual basis. There have been some drastic structural changes in air cargo over the years. Prior to the global financial crisis, air cargo was growing at an average of about 6% per year per annum. Today, we barely see about 1% per year. I believe in April, we came in at 1.3, and I think February we're somewhere around 2.2, which was the highest month so far this year. There have been headwinds and certainly contributing factors that have affected some of these declining trends. From what we see, some of these trends, onshoring. Businesses are finding ways of trying to lower their costs in today's world, looking for lower wages, reinventing themselves, keeping their businesses onshore versus offshore, and keeping their jobs onshore. Trade protection. We have seen in the past some countries, based on sanctions or economical or financial issues, have literally closed their borders to us. Model shift. We've seen businesses downgrade their levels of service, requesting express to standard or even express to a deferred product in order to lower their costs based on the time-sensitive shipments that they're looking for. For UPS, we see these as growth opportunities, especially outside of the general economic expansions. E-commerce is expected to outpace global GDP by 4-fold And when you look at cross-border e-commerce, it's like 7 times the amount. We see growth verticals in areas such as healthcare, electronics, retail, and these position UPS to capitalize on market expansions. Our customers are getting very good at locating their distribution centers near our major facilities, which means that we're able to take air express and put it into our ground system, lowers costs, and helps the businesses meet their needs. At UPS, we're addressing these issues through our integrated network, which is primarily the core of our business. Air is one option for our customers who need that rapid uplift, that next day delivery, but we also offer ground, rail, and ocean options. Rail is not as prevalent here in Europe as it is in the U.S. In the U.S., I would say 15% of merchandise is moved from East Coast to West Coast via the rails. Where here, we're more passenger-driven when it comes to the rail modes. UPS is a company that we're 107 years old today. In 2016, we will have had 40 years here in Europe. It's amazing how much time has gone by. We have just recently announced a $2 billion expansion over the next 5 years here in Europe. Infrastructure and building renovations are areas that we're working on right now. Automated solutions, state-of-the-art sorting facilities, and investing in Europe's future as well. Air cargo, especially the express carriers, need operational securities to help benefit and guarantee contributions to Europe as well as world trade. Global approaches facilitating air traffic to guaranteed service quality. Initiatives such as the Single European Sky need to be approached from a global strategic focus. Europe is one of the leading global markets today and geographically sits in the right position with markets from the U.S. to the left and Asian to the right. But air traffic control creates some inter-Europe type challenges for us. ATC disruptions. On the surface, it doesn't seem like it caused a lot of disruptions, but it becomes very costly to air cargo and air freight express movers. Increased fuel burns to fly around countries because of ATC disruptions, delayed and time-sensitive goods, and really disruption completely of the supply chain. There is support, there's more dialogue. Certainly it's a very sensitive issue when it comes to the labor actions that are occurring. But these are areas that as businesses need help from governmental agencies to ensure that labor doesn't impede or impugn the move of goods and the economies that it impacts. And then the last point I wanted to make with regards to night flights. Again, another very sensitive topics. Night flights play a critical role for cross-border deliveries and next day time in transit type services. Yet we have a number of restrictions that continue to harbor night flights and the trends there. If we limit the skies at night, we limit the flow of goods during the day. We asked for assistance, and I appreciate the Vice Minister's challenges to us. This is one of the areas that I feel that governmental involvement needs to be more involved, quite frankly, with regards to a sensitive subject as night flights, because it does have a huge impact in air service and air cargo movements. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Al. Thank you to all of you for your opening statements. I want to kick off as interactive a discussion as we can now in the remaining time, and as I said, I will open it up to the floor. Before we come on to liberalization, and we will come on to liberalization, I just wanted to ask a very general question. I want to get a really, really quick response from all of you. It's and it relates to something you said, Glenn. You joked about maritime. You joked about the cars being the Formula One cars being put on planes as opposed to ships. I mentioned in my intro the threat of maritime. How big a threat does that remain now, and is that lessening that threat as the economy comes back? Very quickly, a comment from each of you.
Well, I would have to say, and people often talk about modal shift. I actually use a different phrase, which is modal choice. Every time a piece of freight is produced, you know, the shipper needs to get it to destination. So working with his freight forwarder, he has a series of choices to make. And I don't think we need to look, and I joked, but I don't think we really need to compete with each other. I think we need to work harmoniously to make sure that there are adequate supply chains available so that the nearshoring and onshoring is actually something that manufacturers aren't forced to do.
But you are competing with each other, though, right?
But we are, yes, but I still think each has a separate value proposition.
Vladimir?
Surprisingly, I will be talking about liberalization, because all other modes of transport are more liberalized. And I want to make one emphasis. The all-cargo airlines are different from passenger airlines. But when it comes to the negotiations, it's a block. It's everything together.
Yep.
However, the ICAO wanted to split cargo and passengers, quite rightly, because the cargo airlines, they contribute much more to the growth of the national and international trade than any other. And one example, and I would like to pick up the challenge of the Vice Minister, fifth freedom. For those who are not in the aviation law, the fifth freedom say the Russian airline has the right to travel, to pick up cargo in Germany and bring it to the United States. So, Vice Minister, we need more liberalization in this, and this is to the benefit of the national economies.
Okay, well let's put this to the State Secretary now, talk about liberalization generally. How, State Secretary, can a liberalized air transport market generally improve the opportunity for the air freight carriers?
Also ich glaube, der ganz große Unterschied ist,
I think the major difference is between passengers and air cargo. We also see that with our businesses and the demands that are put to the federal government, which are very various and very different. So those who mainly transport passengers have different demands and want to have the market regulated in a much different way than the air cargo sector, where we strongly feel that as an opening of the market is being demanded, be it with new free trade agreements or any other liberalization processes. So there's a major difference between passenger and air cargo transport. For us, it's important to create good competitive conditions in our own country. And prior to liberalization, we have to provide conditions in order to maintain the sector in our country. So the first priority for us is topics such as night flight bans or the removal of night flight bans and other topics that you have mentioned that are essential for our country, such as civil participation that seems to be strange on first view but is decisive for us, and hand in hand with that, the entire area of air pollution, environmental protection. And there's a great phrase, it's a planning determination process. I'm not quite sure whether that's a word in English, but these are the topics that we have to deal with.
That governments are putting the right conditions in place for further liberalization of the freight side.
also natürlich denken die,
Of course, the governments also always think that they are doing a good job, so this is a difficult question. But as a matter of principle, we see the area of tension where we're moving in. How can a better liberalization of the market, I've mentioned the free trade agreements that we openly discuss, how can fair competition be ensured in this environment? And what has been mentioned just now, be it the fifth, sixth, seventh freedom, all the things that have been discussed in this context, how can this still provide fair competition?
Actually, let me put it to all of you, and Vladimir, why don't we start with you, because you were the one who put this question to the State Secretary. What are the biggest obstacles for you right now to a fully liberalized air cargo regime, and how confident are you that governments are putting the right conditions in place, albeit slowly, to help us along the path of liberalization?
I think that the main obstacle is the lack of awareness at the level of the governments, because very rare I can meet a governmental official who understands well the importance of the air cargo. And the second problem is the slow pace of development of this subject in the institution which is dealing with this, it's ICAO, plus the objections which are coming from the members of the same industry. And let me give you a very brief example. Just 1 year ago, when I talked to Glyn, he was supportive of the liberalization for all cargo airlines. And half a year ago, he said that no, we are not going to support this at the level of ICAO. And this is because he has pressure from two sides, all cargo airlines and passenger airlines. And the passenger airlines don't want liberalization of air cargo. So this is a very complex process, and I think that it has to be resolved at the level of ICAO. This is the venue for this.
Glyn, why do government ministers not understand the value of air cargo? These numbers that we've talked about at the top of the program here are pretty eye-opening. Is it a communication issue?
I think partly that's true, yes. I think we need to broadcast more the number of, for example, the 35% of global trade and the fact that it's nearly $7 trillion. This came up in one of the panel sessions yesterday in the opening plenary. I think the broadcaster said she was kind of shocked, or the interview with the panel moderator said she was shocked to see some of these numbers and she had to double check. And she was from the media. So I think if the media are unaware, then we have to look at who is educating as it were, the government people who can actually affect that change. So I think certainly as an industry we have a role to play. I think, to be honest, historically, the air cargo sector, the forwarders, the airlines, the ground handlers, we've kind of just got stuck in to moving things around because we need to focus on the speed rather than actual self-promotion.
Oh, yep, go ahead.
And I think to Vladimir's point, the more that we can actually raise awareness of this issue and in fact that the value that liberalized air cargo services will bring, the more you might see the debate at the ICAO level come to fruition. When it comes down to individual carrier perspectives, then you get diverging requirements. And I think that's led to the point that Vladimir said where, you know, at individual carriers you may have different views, but you need to take it up to that ICAO level.
Okay, well, let's ask the representative of government.
In reaction to the objection that there is no awareness, I would like to react because I think this is not the point. The fact is, as has been mentioned, is that there is a conflict between different approaches that are being put to the government. Air cargo is one important aspect, without doubt, but that's not the only actor that poses conditions to us. And then we also have a very major open house strategy and the air traffic concept that I've mentioned. We have so many hearings with organizations, with businesses, so I think awareness is really not the point. And perhaps I'm exaggerating, but perhaps the point is that a lack of awareness is stated at the moment when one's wishes are not being implemented right away. I'm challenging you there.
I open this up to sort of full-blown debate, but does anyone want to come? Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Does anyone want to come back on that point?
Well, I don't want to come back on that point. I just wanted to maybe add to it. You know, full liberalization of air cargo is a very complicated issue, obviously. We have to understand the differences between freighter operations and, as was mentioned, passenger aircraft. Everybody has but I think we have to better outline airline ownership. We have completely different aspects of airline ownership between the EU and how we have in the US. Cabotage rules that we deal with over in Europe as well too. Ground handling is a prime example. Not all airports allow companies to come in and freely be able to operate their own ground handling operations. It's based on specific permits and authorizations by specific groups that are allowed. There's applications to be made through the Ministry of Transportation in order to get the rights to be able to ground handle your own aircraft. That makes it, gives us less flexibility to be able to do the things that we need to do. So I think it's a very complicated issue.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Vladimir.
I think that I was a bit provocative when I addressed the Vice Minister.
It's woken everyone up, like you said.
And I'm glad to hear this reaction, because this only proves to me that there are countries and there are countries. Germany, in this sense, is perhaps the most developed country in the sense of handling of air cargo, creating conditions for the air cargo. And not surprisingly, my airline has selected Germany, especially Frankfurt, as our major hub. And that's why I'm asking the Vice Minister, please give us a bit more fifth freedom rights right here. However, there are countries which are not aware of this. And that's why I would like once again praise the organizers of this event for creating this session, because this is the first time.
Yeah.
And it's not that we are overwhelmed with attention from the floor. And it's not that we have awareness of all the ministers. So my appeal to you, Vice Minister, and to all who have influence on this, to include the same kind of events in the future meetings,
okay,
and to make sure that the cargo issue is brought up from this level to the level of the ministers.
Glenn, very quick point.
Very quickly, I'd like to touch on this issue of awareness as well, because it's not just at government level, it's about individual consumer level as well. A few years ago, there were a number of grocery chains in different parts of Europe that introduced a program called Food Miles. And they looked upon air cargo as a very negative aspect and would stick labels on food so that people almost looked at, oh, I don't want to buy those groceries because they've polluted CO2 emissions from flying them here. But again, that was lack of education and awareness, because in actual fact, there's two aspects to this. When you bring in fresh fruits and vegetables coming from, let's say, parts of Africa, etc., you're supporting social mobility and social development in emerging countries. You're also supporting produce which is grown fresh in the natural sunlight, versus, for example, in the UK in particular, where a lot of these were being grown under glass, heated greenhouses with lots of pesticides and herbicides. So in other words, that once you educate the consumer, and that program actually stopped because we were able to raise the awareness of the grocery chains about the true facts behind it. So I think quite often it's something that we all need to self-educate as well.
Okay, very good. Many thanks. Yeah, let's have a question from the audience. Gentleman there, if you just wait for a mic. I mean, to be honest, there's not, you could yell as well if you wanted to. Yeah. No, we need a mic. Here it comes. If you just tell us who you are and where you're from.
Thank you. My name is Marco Sorgetti. I'm the director of FIATA, that is the International Freight Forwarders and Logistics Service Providers Federation. And I want to thank you for organizing this panel, very interesting. And there are 2 points that Glenn made that I find very, very interesting. You said something about Africa and the lack of connectivity in Africa that is hampering trade. And you also evoked e-commerce and the booming e-commerce and the requirements that there will be, etc. And I wanted you to reply to a question on how you connect dots sometimes, in the sense that in 2005, you remember there was a convention that made e-commerce possible. And what we see today is the connection. And we see today the booming e-commerce because that convention has made it possible. Needless to say, in 2005 at UNCITRAL, at the United Nations level, transport was excluded by the e-commerce convention. And we now have been sitting for 2.5 years in Vienna and New York at the UNCITRAL electronic transferable records study, which was aiming at a convention for transport. What we're going to get is probably a model law, and that will make transport in the electronic format not so easily and readily available as it could have been. But FIATA was the only industry association sitting there, together with sometimes people from the WCO or the ICC. I think we as transport organizations should be more alert and going to these places more often and connecting the dots more frequently. And coming to Africa, if I may conclude this on an exhortation, tomorrow morning we have this side event on logistics connectivity, which is organized by us and ClayCat. And please do come, because logistics connectivity, including, of course, aviation, is going to be on the table. And This is, in our view, a very, very important point because we need connectivity not only in the air, we need it with ships, trucks, rails, whatever.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do you want to say something on the back of that? On connectivity and your role?
I think that's a very, very valid point. And I think in terms of connecting the dots and connectivity, you have the Yamoussoukro Declaration of Africa, which creates the right environment. But at a conference earlier this year, there was a call from every sector, every person in that audience, actually imploring on the integrators to increase the amount of activity in Africa because they would then introduce, as it were, the ground delivery system. The integrator said, well, effectively, it's very difficult because people tend not to have postcodes. So it's very difficult to then integrate a ground delivery system where you don't actually have what connects through into that. So there are lots of challenges going forward, but you're right, we need to be present in all the forums to try and address them.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Yeah, we'll take that one there and then we'll come to you, sir.
Can I speak French?
Yes, of course. I mean, in the interest of time, it would be better if you spoke English.
Okay.
But,
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Let me, go ahead.
Yes. Bonjour à tous. Je suis ministre du Transport de Tunisie. Je suis venu à cette session parce que je considère que le fret aérien.
I'm minister from Tunisia. I'm a transport minister from Tunisia, and I came to this meeting. I came to this meeting on air cargo because I believe that this is a very important part with a promising future. And I've got a general question. And then I have a more specific question. Let me make a general remark at the outset. I do not understand why air cargo has experienced such a slow growth rate through the last couple of years. In spite of a booming world economy, we have entirely different growth rates in world economy of 4 to 5%. I don't know where that discrepancy comes from. Why is the growth rate so slow in air cargo? Coming from Tunisia, I've got a very specific question regarding my country. The last couple of years, we have not seen an improvement of the air cargo rates, but rather a decrease of such a rate. Now, I wonder, could we have a Tunisian development strategy for air cargo in Tunisia that would be a call upon you? What kind of recommendations would you give us? You're the experts. What kind of recommendations would you give us in order to promote air cargo development in Tunisia? That's my first question or call. And the second question to the organizations represented here, how can you support us so that we can build up such a Tunisian strategy and later implement it?
But Glenn, you want to say something?
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's two questions there. The first one is why has air cargo in the last 4 years basically had a flat growth as opposed, in fact, it contracted for the first two, whilst is growth of international trade. There's two aspects to this. Mostly we would see this is in terms of slow consumer returns to normal activity. So consumers were not looking at replacing televisions or high-tech goods, etc., at the same pace they were before. So therefore, the inventory wasn't needing to be replaced as quickly. So there was quite a lot that was going on ocean that traditionally went by air, and now we're starting to see that coming back by air. That's number one. Number two, as had been mentioned earlier by Al, is that during the global financial crisis, we did see some structural changes in how manufacturing was done. You know, the cost of production in China is rising, and the cost of nearshoring, for example, in Mexico for the US market is decreasing. So you're actually seeing some organizations have nearshored, setting up final production assembly areas in Mexico, for example. They've got less in terms of transportation costs to the final consumer. So there was some structural changes, but now we are certainly seeing this, hopefully, this period of growth return. The second part of your question, which is what can you do in specific countries to have, as it were, promote create a much better environment for air cargo. I would say look at the best practices that exist around the world already. As my colleague Marco has mentioned, is that there are sufficient treaties in place. We would advocate certainly trade facilitation agreements. I mean, Bali, you can implement that as a best practice guide. It's got a lot of very strong guidance in there about making border facilitation, customs facilitation, electronic. The easier it is to do business in a country, bringing goods in and taking goods out, will certainly entice more countries to invest in there. Harmonized security programs based on ICAO Annex 17, secure supply chain solutions, so that when you're dealing with markets, for example, in Europe, as a close trading partner, you can actually see that they will be much more enticing to support a country where you've got very solid security programs in place. So I think there are certain measures, and as IATA or FIATA or TIACA, we'd love to work with you specifically and give you some more specific guidance as well.
Glenn, thanks very much. James.
I'll just supplement a little bit of what Glenn said. I think so far this year, and maybe Glenn, you can correct me, growth in air cargo is about 4.5%, while the world economy is chugging along at about 2.5%. So actually air cargo this year is doing pretty well, and it did reasonably well last year. It's actually outpacing the world economy, but the growth is highly variable depending on the region. So the U.S. economy is coming back pretty strongly. Transatlantic air cargo growth is good. Trans-Pacific air cargo growth is good. I'm going to guess Morocco has a strong economic tie to Europe. The Eurozone has been the weakest of the major economies. It's starting to show some growth, and just like in the case of the U.S., I think it's reasonable to assume in the coming months or year, European consumers will start buying again. European businesses are feeling more confident. They'll start investing again, and air cargo will rise with that, and you'll probably see better trading conditions in your markets, I'm going to guess, just as we have seen in the U.S. That's my thought.
Okay, thank you, James. Yeah, go ahead, Vladimir.
Minister, I would like to tell you that you posed a very important question. Who and how can help you or your neighbors or the whole Africa? And this is where I come to Marco's question too. You are a member of the powerful organization ICAO. And this is yet another place where the level of awareness about cargo is raised. And please work with ICAO and tell them that you need this help. I have been to one of African meeting recently, the only one which ICAO organized. And I can see that there is a lot of will and a lot of potential there, but not enough knowledge. And this is what needs to be brought to your country, to you personally, and to the African states. And this can be done only with the organization as powerful as ICAO. And if you need more, I'm happy to talk to you later on in the coffee break.
Thank you very much. Yeah, question here.
My name is Ola. I'm a journalist.
My name is Ölakin. I'm a free journalist and I work close to Munich. People say that journalists tend to be non-experts in all fields. Therefore, I apologize if my question might be characterized by a lack of knowledge. I've got two questions. And let me start with the following. In 1992, the airport was opened in Munich, and at that time there was a general discussion around the question that everything looks wonderful and perfect and excellent, with one exception. This airport was accessible with only one means of transport, namely an airplane. And I'd like to take your discussion, which seems to have lifted off, back to the ground. One point. There is one airport in Germany which is about to be built in the capital of Germany, construction work which is about never to finish in Berlin. And at the same time, there are a number of airports in the same region which are perfect and which are finished, but where no transport happens, where there is no traffic. I could mention airport in Kassel, where air cargo traffic is about to be processed. But the question is whether all the follow-up work and the preparation work to all these air cargo transports would ease the burden on other modes like roads to such an extent that such an airport would become necessary. And my question to the gentleman from UPS, do you need so many airports in this region to bring your goods to the consumers, or would it be enough to have Frankfurt, Munich, and Berlin? The second question goes to rather refers to the question of competition between air cargo and maritime cargo. The question goes to the gentleman from Boeing. Is it foreseeable that air cargo would be able to compete with maritime transport in terms of environmental impact?
And then we'll come to you, Al, on the first part.
So, I mean, I think competition in general is good for businesses. It makes them improve their services and meet their customers' needs better. Air cargo has real distinct modal advantages, and it's incredibly flexible. Plus, it can operate from any airport, whereas ships obviously are confined to the coastal region. So I'm not too worried about the possibility of maritime shipping replacing the need for air cargo. And then as far as environmental goes, I mean, we've bent every effort to try to improve the airplanes and make them more fuel efficient. And then, of course, the lower holds of the passenger airplanes are in some ways kind of a free no environmental impact, because the airplanes are already making the trip for passenger reasons, and half the cargo is going in the lower hold. So, and then, you know, air cargo being able to get directly to a destination saves a lot of the landward transportation potentially, which adds to the environmental. So I think at the end of the day, you know, air cargo has a pretty reasonable environmental footprint, provided we keep working on efficiencies, providing new updated airplanes, and you know, again, the airport infrastructure makes progress so that airplanes can be directly routed on their flights. And then again, I think it's up to us as an industry to keep improving our services to meet the competitive challenge from the maritime shippers, who, you're right, have been improving their products as well. And that's the way business is supposed to work, right? Nothing stands still. Customer needs are always changing. The expectations are becoming more demanding. It's up to us to meet those going forward if we're going to be successful. And that's what we work at with our customers, like the gentleman seated to my right, two gentlemen.
Okay, so we've touched a little bit on the environment there. If we have time, we'll come back to it. Al?
Just real quickly, I think your question was, do we need more airports to bring air cargo? The question is really twofold, because when you talk about air cargo in many cases is a day running type operation where flights are predominantly during the day. When you talk about the express carriers, it's more of a night operation, and that's really where the noise issues come into play. When we make substantial investments in airports, yet we are limited with the amount of time set forth that we're allowed to have night flight restrictions, it makes it very difficult for businesses to come and invest into the economy when we are not sure what the future holds for these night flight restrictions. You don't want to spend $200 million retrofitting an airport, and then within 5 years you're no longer able to fly, or you have restrictions in night flights that would prevent you from doing your business. So I don't want to say we need more airports, we just need more flexibility in the airports that we're flying out of today.
Okay, thank you very much. Just want to quickly gauge, because we are running out of time, if there are any other questions from the audience. If not, we've got a few things we can continue with up here. Okay, yeah, okay. One quick question here. Well, you wanted to say something about the environment, didn't you?
I did. I just wanted to say very quickly before I go to my colleague, actually. Okay. Yes, just coming back on that, I just would like to reinforce one point that Jim was making. More than 50% of the world's population now lives in urbanized environments. The major megacities of the future will be further inland. The value proposition that air cargo brings from an environmental perspective is that we are closer to point of production and we're closer to point of consumption. As we saw yesterday, and as we heard from some of the OECD research, these mega container ships will require up to 9,000 trucks driving not the final mile, it's the final 500 miles or the final 1,000 miles bearing in mind that manufacturing is moving further and further inland, for example, in China. So what we would advocate, and in fact it's more than advocate, is what we actually demand, is that when people look at the environmental impact, they look at total impact from start to finish, not just measure port to port and say, well, port to port environmental impact is X, compare that to air. The air sector, by our study, is 98% of the total journey, with a small amount of road feeder at start and small amount of road or other feeder at destination or delivery at destination. So this is, again, coming back to this notion of education, is people have to look at the complete journey from start to finish.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Yeah, let's have the question.
Yeah, I just have a question based on your title, Vice Minister, because you're in charge of transport and digitalization word, or can't remember exactly the exact title. What does it mean exactly? Because it's very, very important on our side, on air cargo side, to have actually really the move to electronic world to make things moving faster and being more efficient and etc. So what is it that you are doing in that area?
Also es ist das erste Mal, dass es
It's the first time that the ministry has been restructured as a ministry for transport and digital infrastructure. On the one hand, that means that in typical infrastructure, road, rail, water, we're expanding, and on the other hand, on digital infrastructure. So on the one hand, we have a broadband expansion as such, higher bandwidth, and as federal government, we committed ourselves until 2018 to provide at least 50 Mbit per second for every household in Germany. But that's just an intermediate step. So we will have to go much further than that. But that's just one issue. The second issue that's very important for us is digitalization of the entire infrastructure. Issues such as partially automated, fully automated systems, up to autonomous driving, and the same goes for digitalization of transport. For example, when you look at such a hub, UPS can certainly confirm that it allows us not to lose employment, but to restructure employment. For example, for automated aircraft parking, so that no labor is needed for parking in aircraft, because these are working hours that are not compatible with family life, for example. So that can also be an improvement for our employees. But with digitalization, as we've already mentioned with customs, when air cargo has already been dispatched, then we can save 10 hours with electronic paperwork. So improving all these processes, reducing costs, and perhaps in the future, just to give you one keyword, 3D printing, to create the possibility that less environmental pollution takes place. Unfortunately, we haven't talked about innovation as much as would have been necessary, so the entire area of what can be done through innovative digital solutions, for example, noise reduction and so on. So I think there is so much potential in that I'm very pleased that infrastructure, typical infrastructure and digital infrastructure are united in one ministry.
Terry, regulation, liberalization is not your ministry. It's not the responsibility of your ministry. It's the Ministry of the Interior. Is that right?
Wir sind auch
Well, in many issues we also advise, and we also have a ministry for economy that is responsible for that. So we have a very strict department principle, but issues that concern our industry, we're always involved in the discussions.
Just one more quick check that there's nothing else in the audience here. And rather than me giving a wrapped up conclusion with a journalist hat on, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pose one question to each of our panelists and then allow the Vice Minister just to say make a general closing statement if she wishes. And the question to each of our panelists, and if you like, bring innovation into it, because as we just heard quite rightly, we haven't really touched on it to any great degree. The question is this, and apologies that this is a little provocative, but why should we repeat, actually, let me put it like this. Make the case, if you could, for a repeat of an air cargo panel at the ITF Forum next year. Why should we repeat an air cargo panel discussion at the ITF forum next year?
Each question like that, my son says, just because.
Yeah, and you're not allowed to say just because.
But I'm doing another answer later on. So, but
you don't have to respond to that one if you don't want. You can make some closing statements, but I want to hear from these guys why they think we should do another air cargo panel next year.
Okay, I'll start. 2 reasons. Number one, because 3D printing will actually mean that you don't have to have us physically here. You can actually replicate us. But actually twofold, and a serious answer, and I would like to touch upon 3D if this is the last comment.
Okay.
Because next year it'll be 36% at least of global trade and over $7 trillion, and maybe 1.1% of volumes going up. And therefore, I think it's important to be here because we'll be growing in value. Just one last word, if I may, on innovation. We've heard a lot this week mentioned about 3D printing, and yesterday some of the ocean transport guys were saying that they have to watch out because much of what they ship is actually going to be subject to possible 3D printing. I have to be honest, I'm actually an other advocate. I'm welcoming 3D printing. I think as an industry we should accelerate it for 2 reasons. Number one, 3D printers will be extremely expensive, and therefore air cargo will need to fly these things around the world. And there will be a huge market of over 1 million 3D printers because of the number of 3D printers you'll need to replicate what is done in a production line basis today. And 2, obviously all the materials used to actually source, as it were, the 3D printing, they are high value and high cost materials. So I think this is one of those growth areas for air cargo, and so this is an innovation which we would actually welcome.
Okay, thank you. Al?
Just real quickly, topics that we haven't touched on, security.
Yeah.
We could spend all day talking, and all week talking about pure security and the threat that we have, especially when you talk about air cargo. And then we touch basically just a little bit about technology. How is technology affecting us when it comes to security? Because we are spending an awful lot of money in securing the cargo that's coming through our borders today. And then sustainability. Those 3 topics, security, sustainability, and technology, I think are things that need to come back. And again, more dialogue, talking about whether it's government regulations or what the industry can do to improve upon these things to help the flow of goods across Europe and the world.
Thank you, Al.
I would say that we don't need this panel. We need an enhanced panel. And the reason for this is the following. Let me give you one example. To clear the goods in Singapore through the customs and other formalities, on the way in and out, it's approximately 4 to 6 days. To clear the goods in Latin America, it's 24 to 26 days. So what we need here is the customs regulatory authorities, World Customs Organization. Then I would like to see Marco, not up there, but here, because he is a very important participant in the supply chain. And I can go on, and I suggest several others, including Professor Yoshik, who has been doing research and who has been supporting either awareness of the cargo or lack of awareness. You, in your ITF, don't have any research as yet with regard to the air cargo. So all these pieces have to come into, to fall into place, and then this panel will be more comprehensive, and then we can lead to the solutions rather than just amusing ourselves with the innovative ideas which will die out here and will not go anywhere. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. James, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, that was a great list, and I would also add, we had some conversation about how to build an air cargo presence in some of the emerging markets, and that might be worth touching on because there's certainly some case histories of countries capitalizing, and Glenn referred to like flowers and produce coming out of East Africa. It's been an important part of economic development story, and it can be furthered with some of the things we talked about. And then there's one final thing. Next year's our 100th birthday at Boeing, and our first product was a freighter, carried airmail, and it'd be a nice birthday present to us to have a panel. Invite us back.
All right. James, thank you very much. And I'd like to give the final word to the State Secretary, who I want to thank as well for her candor and flexibility in this discussion. But please go ahead.
And a cake, of course, next year. So,
Vladimir already said a few of the things I wanted to say. I want to expand the discussion to the political side. I always notice that actors in transport talk with us, be it strikes that are not really our responsibility or be it other issues. So I suggest also when we're talking about customs that we invite the financial ministry in order to have the responsible authority here on the floor. The same goes for the economic ministry or Ministry for Labor and Social Affairs. The wage sector, strikes and so on, these are issues for which the ministries, the politicians have to be invited who are in charge of these issues. But we agree on many of the aspects we've talked about. And since Germany is a federal state and we talk about issues like night bans, and we also heard demands about not only talking with the politicians but seeing it as an overall societal talk, why won't we invite the head of a civil initiative that is in favor of night bans and explain to them the importance of air cargo for our country, for value creation, for employment, for economic development. So I would want to have these actors on the panel as well, and we don't need to have a harmonic debate. Arguments are a good thing.
Thank you very much indeed for your contribution, State Secretary. I want to thank our panel as well for their contribution. The first of this sort of panel at the ITF, as I said, and hopefully we'll be back next year with another air cargo panel. And thank you to you for all of your questions as well. Just want to very quickly bring to your attention the presentations at the Open Stage Cafe, the ITF Open Stage Cafe, which is out here and to the left. Do be aware of those. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you very much.